What is up, road painters? Welcome back to the channel for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday. For today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the Glaivewraith stalkers from issue 4. I do have a review on that. I'll put a link just up in the top corner there for you to go and have a look at that. But in this issue, we did get these. There were 4 of these, and what we're going to do is split this into 2 sections. One focusing on the Glaivewraith himself, and then another one on the base. Obviously we're using this particular model for today's demonstration, so without further ado, let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do with this is using Abaddon Black. We're going to paint the top half of the wraith here. So we're just going to get some of this into our palette. Once again, I am using a wet palette here, but you can use whatever you like. What we want to do with this is actually thin this down quite a bit, because we don't quite want it setting on the highest points, and you'll see why when we get to the next step. So for now, we just want it relatively thin. And all we're looking to do is the sort of the hooded robe type area. We just want to get a couple of nice thin coats on this, and hopefully the idea is to have some of the base colour show through the recess. So obviously, if your undercoat for this was a white paint, then there's a step or two that you can skip for this. If it was black, then obviously this will be the step that you skip. We're just going to go down there, sort of work out what areas of the robes are black and what becomes the sort of the ethereal essence. Some of these it is a little hard to tell. I do know that some people count the whole thing as one piece, you know, the robe and the ghost himself. I like to give a little bit of contrast between the two. Just to break the model up a little bit. So if you guys want to just go ahead and get your layers on here, and we'll be back in a bit. Okay, so once you've got that done, we can move on to the next step. And for this, we're going to use some Nighthaunt Gloom. Now for this step, you can either leave the previous black step, and if you undercoated in white or grey, then you'll end up with something similar to this, where you have the darker areas and the in the shade and the recesses, and then the lighter areas on the high points there. But we're going to do it this way. This is my preferred method. So all we're going to do, we're actually going to take straight from the pot for this, nice and easy, and we're just going to go over everything that we just did with the black, and we can work quickly because this technical paint does tend to dry a little bit quick. You don't want to pull too much of it off of what we've already done, and you'll end up with patches in the paint. And as you can see, that one dip into the pot lid that I did there is pretty much enough to cover this entire model. Just one more bit there. So obviously, if you want to go the quick method, just go in with your gloom straight over the top of your primer and skip the previous step. Okay, so once that's had time to dry, we're going to take some ceramite white, and again you can skip this step if your undercoat, you know, your primer was done with a white paint. If it was done with black, then obviously this will take a few more steps than, or a few more layers than what it will if you're using grey. And if you did use a white, it is entirely up to you if you want to go back over with the ceramite white just to get a more even coverage. Right, so all we're going to do is everything that will be done that is the ghost himself, sort of the ethereal essence. We're just going to get all this white in preparation for the next step. So if you guys want to go ahead and do that, including the stuff coming up the bottom here, and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so once we've done our white down here, we can go on to the next step, and this is going to be a light dry brushing. We're going to take some of the Abaddon black and some of the ceramite white. We're just going to mix that up to get ourselves a pale grey. I'd say it's 3 parts white, 1 part black. And then all we're going to do is very liberally dry brush just over the highest peaks of the gloom that we did. We can get just the edges as well, so anywhere around here, just on the back here. We doesn't need to be perfect. Doesn't need to be a harsh, sharp highlight, as this is just to add something over the top that we want to catch lighter, but it won't if we have the dark gloom there. Right, so I'm just looking to pick off edges like so. Right, so just give that a second to dry, and then we can move on to the next step. Right, so for our next step, we're going to take some Aethermatic Blue contrast paint. And we're just going to put some of this into our palette here. Probably a bit too much, a bit more than we need, but that's fine. And all we're going to do is paint it over the highlights that we've just done. You can come down into the deeper areas as well, it doesn't matter too much. What this does is stains the highlights with this ethereal blue. And then we're going to come down and then pull back up, leaving the base of the ghost pale. Now as you run out of paint on your brush, you'll get this smoother gradient towards the bottom. So if you pull up from the bottom and end up at the top, and at the top you can just go a little bit heavy with the application on it, get it to settle in those recesses. Don't forget the inside as well. You want to come down probably about just over half to maybe 2/3 of the way down the ethereal part. And what I like to do with the bottom is the reverse. So we want to start at the bottom, and then that's going to get more white as it comes up. Like I said, don't worry too much about overloading at the top. We do want that. You may need to hold your model at an angle so that the paint doesn't run down the model, as we do when it's sitting up into these recesses at the top here. Alright, so we'll just hold that for a bit, let that dry, and then we'll be back in a sec. Right, so while that is drying, we can actually move on to a separate area. We can take some Xandri dust, and we're just going to do the skull and the hands with this. And that way we don't have to sit around doing nothing while we wait for the ethereal blue to dry. Obviously, if you're doing multiple models at a time, then by the time you've finished your last model, your first one should be about dry anyway. If not, then you can come onto this step. So just take that Xandri dust and go over everything that will be bone or flesh. So the head, the hands, and the spines on the back. Obviously with the hands, be careful not to pick up any ethereal blue. If you do, or if you don't want to risk it, wait until it fully dries and then move on to this step. I'm just showing here that you can do it without waiting fully, as long as you are careful. But normally I would recommend, best practice to be to wait for it to fully dry before moving on to the next. But it is entirely up to you. So if you want to go ahead and do that, or if you've already dried, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so next we can take some Mournfang Brown, and we're just going to do the pike handle here, or the spear handle. And And we're just going to get a nice even coat of that. So if you just want to thin this down ever so slightly, and then go ahead and paint that. And we're just looking to just get a nice coat over the shaft here. So if you want to get on with that, I'll catch you in a second. Okay, so once that step is done, we're going to take some more ceramite white and a dry brush. And we are now going to dry brush the white area just as it comes up into the blue to about halfway, and then just pick off some of the edges. You can do this coming the other way as well. And the idea of this is just to get a smoother transition. And pick off some of the highlights here. But we're looking to get a smoother transition from the white into the blue. And obviously with the bottom, then go the other way. We don't need perfect coverage with this, as we do want some of that blue to show through slightly. Now what I'm actually doing with this is dry brushing or wiping the excess off on a slightly damp area of my paper towel. And what that's doing is allowing the paint to blend slightly or apply smoother rather than getting harsh lines that you would normally get with dry brushing. So it's just a damp area just where I've been cleaning off my brush or drying off my brush after rinsing it. And you can see that as I work my way up, it's given a smoother blend due to the slightly damp but minimal paint that is on the brush. Just try and pick off some of the edges up here. If you notice that it's starting to become dry and you're getting that dry wispy look of your dry brush, go ahead and just dab your brush back into some of that damp paper towel and you'll get that smoother blend again. I'm not entirely sure if the camera picks it up there. I think because of the light. But you can see that we've got that nice transition between the blue coming down to the white. Right, so now that that's done, all we're pretty much doing now Use dry brush in certain areas. But just before we get onto that, we're just going to go ahead and paint the blade black. Obviously, if you did a black undercoat, no need for this step. Okay, so once that's had time to dry, we're going to go ahead and take some iron breaker and a dry brush, or any kind of flat brush for this. We don't need a lot. I'm going to mix in a small amount of black. You can use, I think it's called lead belcher, or the old bolt gun metal, you know, sort of a dark silvery tone for this. And all we're going to do from the bottom to the top, just dry brush, pulling up the model. I say dry brush, we're not drying the brush off, but we are just giving a sort of streaky look as we come up. You want to give this a sort of a rough, worn, dirty, old, you know, well used look to it. You know, it's not nice and clean like the Stormcast Eternals would be. You know, this is something that they've been buried with or just picked up off the battlefields, and so we just want more of a rough looking blade. Okay, now once that's dried, we're just going to take some non-oil and just going to put this in a few places. What we're going to do is get a decent amount on the end of your brush, and then we're just going to blob it on. And this will give a sort of a dirty, blotchy, stained look to the blade. And then we're just going to do a small amount over the fingers and the hands, between the teeth on the skull. Alright, so we'll go ahead and let that dry, and then we can move on to the final two colours. So we'll be back in a second, guys. Okay, so now we're just going to take some Scrag Brown. Just a small amount on the brush. Wipe that off into our palette and then onto our paper just for a dry brush. And we're just going to heavily dry brush the shaft of the spear here. There we go. Right, and once that's dried, we're just going to take some of the Xandri dust already on our palette, get most of that off, and just dry brush very lightly, trying to pick up some of those extra details on the shaft of the pike there. And we can do the same over the face. Just go back over. Right, and then finally we're just going to take some Ushakti bone. And on a dry bit of paper towel, just wipe most of the excess off, and again we're going to dry brush over the bone areas. Right, and then just mix some white in with that, and again just lightly touch across, just try and pick off those raised areas. There we go, guys. Nice and quick. Ready for the battlefield. Right, so I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you did, be sure to leave it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Obviously, Mortal Realms Monday is every Monday, with the exception to the next couple of weeks. I may be missing some issues due to the coronavirus situation. The deliveries are being a little bit delayed. I think I now get all 4 issues on the 3rd week of the month, roughly. So 2 weeks from now, and then the 3rd week I should have the issue 5 ready, and then it should be smooth sailing from there. If you'd like to check out my other social, I've got Twitch and Instagram and Twitter down below, in the links down below. Check them out. I do live painting on Twitch, and you can see photos of the finished models from here, and anything that I do on Twitch over on my Instagram and Twitter. You can keep up to date with what I'm doing, when I'm streaming, and when new videos go up. If you'd like to support me a little bit more, then I do have a Patreon. It's just a basic support on there at the moment, just a couple of pounds a month, just to you know, show you appreciation. Otherwise, you know, I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks a lot.